911. And as you just heard John say, beginning in June, we're going to do that actually in this building as opposed to doing it at Lipscomb University. This building has seen miracles. When a person gives himself or herself to Jesus, and we baptize them like John recently has baptized people and other folks have, then a miracle takes place when that happens, because a person goes from darkness to light. They go from lost to saved. We could use all kinds of ways to explain it, but basically what happens is a miracle, an absolute miracle. Additional miracles will happen in this building when we bring those couples in here. We've been doing that particular workshop since 1999. The couples that come to it don't come just because they want to get a little boost to their marriage. Occasionally, believe it or not, somebody does. The couples that come to that particular workshop come because their marriage is in crisis. About 90% of the couples who come, one spouse does not want to be there. That spouse has no intention or desire for that marriage to be saved. They come for various reasons. Sometimes they come to get a minister off their back or a church elder off the back. Sometimes they come so they can look their children in the eye and say, I have tried everything. Believe it or not, often they come because the spouse trying to save the marriage has offered them a deal. If you agree to go to this 3-day workshop, then I will give this much more in the divorce. Many times on Friday morning, we will be told by various people there, just try to get this over with as quickly as you can. The divorce papers are in the car. And she said, or he said, that at the end of this workshop at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, they'll sign. So just get it over with. But since 1999, according to a research study done by Dr. Jim Grayson at Augusta State University, interviewing people who have been in that workshop up to 7 years prior, 77% of them were still together. Now, understand that in the marriage world, in marriage counseling, if a couple comes to you in crisis, if 1 year later, 50% of them are still together, that's considered to be a gold standard. You did really well. If a year after that, 17% of them are still together, it's considered to be acceptable. And yet, we're saying that people 7 years later, 77% of them still married. Now, I'm not that smart. John loves to repeat that story, as a matter of fact. He did it just again the other day. A friend of mine, Dr. Charles Hayden, a psychiatrist, the only physician I know that never finished high school. Doesn't have a high school diploma, doesn't have a GED. They literally came and got him out of high school and put him in college. That's how bright he is. And I told John this story to my regret, because John repeats it regularly. Charles used to help us, Dr. Hayden used to help us with a workshop, and he looked at me one day and said, I know this is from God, Joe, because you're just not that smart. John, you delight in telling that story. But it's true. I am not that smart. It's a miracle, and so those miracles are going to start happening here. So about a month from now, when you pull in on a Sunday, you'll see a banner, assuming the church will let me put the banner up. Then on the weekends of our workshop, there'll be a banner right out next to the road that says Marriage Helper 911. When you see that, you know that at least some of the couples in our worship that day will be here from all over America. Sometimes they come from all over the world. And many of them, we're hoping, will actually come to church with us on Sunday morning. And so be sure to be friendly to them. And then as soon as Mike's Bible class ends, we'll start rearranging things in here. Not everything, as John said, but some things to set up for our workshop. And so instead of going from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. as we do now with a lunch break, we'll be going from about 12:15 to about 6:30 on Sundays. And we ask every time you see that banner, you just start praying, please. Because the stories are horrendous. 67% of those couples that come to us, their marriage has been affected by an extramarital affair. Sometimes the husband, sometimes the wife, sometimes both. People come in with every kind of story you can imagine, from dealing with addictions like alcohol to one person just not being very nice to the other. And yet, by the grace of God, changes happen. And so, in addition to the miracles already happening in this building, there will be more miracles. So please pray for that to occur. And we'll probably later ask for some you goats, guys, if you will, to volunteer to help us maybe move some chairs and things like that. If you don't want to, that's fine. Certainly don't feel compelled. But we'll ask you to help us save marriages in doing what you can do. It's just wonderful. So sometimes people ask, and that's why I'm going to read this text today. Sometimes people say, man, you really like doing those workshops, don't you? And my response is, oh, no. I dread them. I don't like to go to them. Then why do you go? Well, you must understand. Let me explain the dreading part. Can you imagine 25, 30 couples who come into a room on a Friday morning and they're not talking to each other, much less to anybody else, and they're angry and they're hurt, and some of them are scared, and there's just so much misery. And then over 3 days, hearing all that pain poured out again and again and again. Nobody likes to hear those stories because they hurt, they break your heart. Now, we live for the miracle at the end when we know that X percentage of them are going to be saved, but that's still not the reason we do it. 1 John chapter 3, beginning of verse 11, the Apostle John, sometimes referred to as the Apostle of Love, he says, "This is the message you heard from the beginning. We should love one another. Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brothers were righteous. Do not be surprised, my brothers, if the world hates you. Let me stop and explain just for a second what he said. If you get the gist of his message there, what he's saying is, if you love God, if you do things that are right, you must anticipate that people in this world who do not love God, who do not love things that are right and true and good and holy, will hate you. They'll hate you because of the very fact that you're doing right. And so we go through life thinking, okay, I'm just going to be a good Christian, and then everybody's going to love me, and God's going to make all these blessings occur. God does bless us for being good Christians, but you must understand, God loves us and blesses us in spite of ourselves often, but you must understand that we are at war with the world. I'll explain more about that in a couple of weeks. We are at war with the world. What that means is that there are many people who will ridicule us or laugh at us or do everything they can to stop us or to shut us down. They'll say bad things about us. They'll treat us badly just because of what we believe and what we stand for. And it goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden when that began, when Cain killed his brother. So when he says, do not be surprised, my brothers, if the world hates you, we should not be. The next verse says, we know that we have passed from death to life. How do we know? Because we love our brothers. Anyone who does not love remains in death. So if you want to look for a sign of discipleship, if you want to know if somebody's a Christian or not, often what we'll say is, were you baptized, and who baptized you, and what did he say? The real sign of discipleship is not whether John baptized you or I baptized you or one of our shepherds or whatever. The real sign of discipleship is whether we have love for each other. That's how we know if somebody is actually changed. That's how we know if somebody is actually of God. They find themselves full of love. And anyone who does not love remains in death. And then the next verse says, anyone who hates his brother is a murderer. And you know that no murderer has eternal life in him. By the way, that's tough for some people to read because some people actually are full of hate towards somebody. One of the ladies at our workshop, you can't know who she is, therefore I can tell her story. It's still anonymous. Came to me yesterday. At one of the breaks, she told me a story. She said, when I was a child, and this woman's nearly as old as I am, which means, late hundreds. But when she was a child, she was sexually abused by her father. She had to deal with that pain all of her life. You can imagine the kind of emotion she would have toward that man, who, by the way, is still alive. She told me about a situation where that she would still go back home to see her parents and those kinds of things, even in her adult life. And not long ago, now, this lady's at least like 50s, no joke. Not long ago, when she went home, her dad actually approached her, looked her in the eye, and said, I am so terribly sorry for what I did to you. Can you possibly find it in your heart to forgive me? And she did. She forgave him. She said, actually, believe it or not, we're beginning to develop some closeness now. You understand that might be a long time to accomplish. But she's no longer full of that negative emotion toward him. You see, hate never hurts the other person nearly as much as it hurts us. It destroys us from within. So that John would say, look, if you have hate in your heart, you're guilty of murder already. As far as God's concerned, what's in your heart indicates what you would do. Now look at the next verse. He says, this is how we know what love is. Because you must understand that love is a nebulous emotion. It is very difficult sometimes to explain. Particularly in America, when the word love refers to so many different things. I love banana pudding. Pudding? Boy, I'm Southern. I love banana pudding. It just kind of got hung right there. I love banana pudding, particularly when Jan makes it. I love I love the truck my brother has loaned me that he may never get back because I love it very much. I love Alabama football when we're winning. You see, we just have one word that covers so many different things, but when I talk about loving my children or loving my wife, it doesn't mean the same thing as loving Alabama football or a truck or banana pudding. And so we have a little difficulty in our language with the word love because it covers so many things. And so what he's going to do, even in that language back then, when they had more words for love and could be more specific about which word they chose, he still needed to explain it. This is how we know what love is, agape. Here's how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. Now, let's make sure we understand that. Sometimes in a husband and wife situation, one person expects the other person to do things just because they feel it. For example, there may be a conversation where a husband turns to his wife and says, "What is it you want me to do that will make you happy?" And she might reply, "If I have to tell you." And she might give that response because she's saying, you should just know what I want, you should just know what I need, and you should just do it. And if I tell you, you'll only do it because I told you, and that doesn't count. Actually, that counts more. The greatest act of love ever known, the one that he's talking about in this passage, was done by a man who did not want to do it, who in the garden before his crucifixion was praying and begging the Father, if there's any other way, please don't make me do this. And then he went and did it because it was the right thing to do for us. The greatest act of love ever shown. You see, love is not always an emotion. Love has the right kind of motivation. I'll explain that in a minute. It has the right kind of motivation, but love is really what you do. It's the act. And so if I look at Alice and say, tell me how I can make you feel more loved, if she tells me and then I do it, even if it's not my nature, which by the way is exactly what happened in a marriage. I may have told you this before, forgive me if it's redundant. Alice grew up in a home where they hug for everything. If one of them kills a fly, oh, that's the best fly killing I ever saw. I grew up in a home that just wasn't very touchy-feely at all. We just weren't huggers. And so early in our marriage, Alice would say, you need to hug me more. And my response was, oh, I'm not like that. I grew up in this home which really wasn't very touchy-feely. You know what I just said to her in practicality? I know you think you need that, but you don't. Is that not the practical message that I just gave her? Do you think she went, you're right, I'll find somebody else to hug me? No. Explaining to her why I wasn't going to do what she needed or wanted did not make the need or want go away. It was genuine, and so I trained myself to hug my wife more because it's not my nature. And if you're thinking, wow, you're supposed to feel it before you do it, my response is, no, in my case, it had to be doing it until I felt it because she needed that. And that's what Jesus did in the garden. This is not my nature. I didn't come here looking to have this great pain. I mean, that's not what my whole goal was, just to hurt. My goal is to save humanity. I dread doing it. I don't want to do it. But they need it. So I'll do it. And that's the greatest act of love there is. Does that make any sense to you at all? No, that explains why anybody who works with people in trouble does it. Whether you're working with women who are struggling with pregnancy out of wedlock, whether you're helping, well, again, women who have been abused by their husbands. Sometimes it's the other way around. There are men who are abused. But when you're working with anybody who has some kind of a crisis, people who are in deep financial trouble, whatever it might be, when you're working with people in trouble, people in crisis, it's not a real pleasant experience because if you care about people at all, when you hear their stories, it hurts. It hurts you to see their pain. It hurts you to see them cry. It hurts you to see their hopelessness and their frustrations. Then why do you do it? Because this is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us. And we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers. That's why you do it. So even if you have to make yourself go, even if you have to make yourself do what needs to be done, that is love. the greatest example of love, the most love you can give. A friend of mine asked me some months ago, he said, you guys just can't make any money at what you're doing. Well, when you work with marriages in crisis, you work with people who often are in financial straits. So you're right, we don't make money at this. Why don't you just quit and do something where you can, at your age, you need to be putting a little money aside and get, where you can retire someday, or at least not have to work every day and all that kind of stuff. Why don't you go do that? The only way I knew to illustrate was to tell a story. So pardon me when I tell you the story. Many years ago, when Alice and I didn't do very well, Alice and I divorced in 1984. I divorced Alice in 1984. In 1987, we remarried and have been married ever since. Next month, we'll have another anniversary. I'll have to stop and do some figuring to tell you which one. The first time we married was on June 7th. She didn't want to use that day for our second anniversary, so the second time we married on June 14th. So we have 2 anniversaries next month. She expects presents on both. During the time that she and I were apart, I became pretty close to this other guy who was having some struggles. I'll just tell you his first name, Lee. This was over in Alabama, where we were living at the time. I was in my distress. He was in his distress. I was acting out, doing some bad stuff at the time. He was acting out, doing some stuff that wasn't so great himself. And we made a pledge to each other. If ever you get so despondent you think that you are going to leave this earth, in other words, if you ever think you're going to do yourself in, we made a covenant with each other that we would call the other person. If I get despondent, I'll call you, Lee. He says, if I get despondent, I'll call you, Joe. A year or two after that, Alice and I got back together. I still occasionally heard from Lee, not a whole lot. Alice and I had been remarried for a while. About 7 o'clock one morning, the phone rang. Now, this was before your phone would tell you who's calling. I just knew somebody's calling at 7 a.m. I had not yet gotten out of bed. It was 7 a.m. And I'm thinking, whoever that is, he or she is being inconsiderate. I'm not answering that phone. And I didn't. We also didn't have the voicemail and all that other stuff. You understand that just the phone rang for a while, then it stopped, and that was the end of that, and then I don't know who it was. About 3 hours, maybe 4 after that, I got a call from another friend of mine who said, Lee shot himself this morning. He's dead. You know what I'm thinking? Was that him? There's no way I can ever know. But in my heart, was that him? If I'd picked up the phone, would I have saved his life? I spoke at his funeral. I have read about this in my psychology books. I'd never experienced it. I knew it existed. I was shocked when it happened to me. When you're the minister, you get to go places in the funeral home that other people don't get to go. I walked into the room where Lee's body had already been prepared, but it wasn't ready to be shown yet to the family, and I had driven down to Montgomery. I walked into that room and saw him and was instantly just filled with rage. I was so mad at him. Like I said, I was familiar with the concept. I'd studied it. I just never experienced it. I wanted to beat him up. Of course, it's his body, it's not him. I spoke at his funeral. It was sometime later when somebody said, if you could go back and change one thing in your life, just one, what would you pick? Well, I've messed up so many things. Anybody else messed up at least one thing in your life? That if you were given the privilege of going back and undoing just one thing, just one, any idea what you'd pick? I would answer the phone. When I said that to the other guy who knew the story, he said, but you don't even know that was him. No, I don't. It could have been somebody else about something. It could have been a wrong number for all I know. But that's still what I'd pick. I'd answer the phone. So at least in my heart I would know I didn't let my brother down, because I did. Lee was a Christian. He was a confused Christian when that happened. I'm certainly against murder of any kind, including murder of oneself. At the same time, I do believe that because of his confusion, it was not an act of total and outright rebellion. I do believe that Lee is in heaven. I do believe that. And when I get to heaven, I am going to beat him up. Or at least I'm going to try. Because now, in what we do, when I start to get discouraged and think, this is just too hard. I don't think I can do another month of this. I don't know how we're going to make it financially one more month, because all these couples are just in so much trouble financially. And some can pay us, some cannot. You know, I really need to get some other job. You know, I know what would take away my stress. I could be the greeter at Walmart. I'm the right age. I could do that. It's got to be simpler, don't you think? Lee pops back in my head. He still lives in there. And then I start thinking beyond that, and I start picturing all the children. You know, the greatest fear that most children have? The greatest fear most children have is that their parents are going to split up. That they won't be living with both mama and daddy. So then I start picturing in my mind the children at night lying in their beds, weeping before God, praying with all their heart, please make mommy and daddy love each other again. And I think, God cares. And so, like with everything else God does, not everything, but with most things that God does, he could work the miracle, or he could do it through people and work the miracle that way. When it comes to bringing people to him so their souls can be saved, God works through people. When it comes to help to save a marriage, God works through people. So I remember how I let Lee down. And then I think about those children praying their hearts out, and decide we can do it one more month. We can make it another month. And the success rate continues to be about 3 out of 4 couples. That on Friday morning, if you were there, if you sat there and listened to the stories on Friday morning, you would look at me and go, none of these people are going to make it. I would tell you, it's Friday. Sunday's coming. Just wait. Just watch. We will do what we're supposed to do, and then we'll let God work the miracle. And 3 out of 4 of those marriages make it. Now you get to be part of that. It's an act of love. By the way, in the next several weeks, actually, I'm going to be challenging you to do several things as an act of love. Several things as an act of love, things that may be uncomfortable for you, things that you may not want to do, such as we need to go start finding people that don't know Jesus and bringing them to Jesus. And that's an uncomfortable thing for many people to do. But if you love people, how could you not? Love like this. Not that ooey gooey feeling, but like this is the right thing to do. If Jesus would do the right thing for me, even when he didn't want to, I've got to do the right things for other people, even when I don't want to. And if that means going and talking to people that are lost, people that are different than us, who don't look like us, talk like us, smell like us, act like us, they're there. But we'll start here. We'll start with the marriages. But look, it can't just be us in this, as John says, beautiful building, taking care of just us. That's important. We should take care of us. But if we're going to love like Jesus loved, there's a whole lot more people that need us too. So get ready, either to jump on the bandwagon and start doing things for people, or to get irritated because you hear about it all the time. But that's what love is. If you'll excuse me, I've got to go back to Lipscomb. I've got a whole bunch of couples in trouble over there. This morning, I was watching things happen and thanking God again for the miracles, and I want to go back and see how it finishes. And then next month, it'll happen here. If we can help you in any way, please make your need known by coming to the front right now while we stand and sing.
Jesus is Lord, my Redeemer.